Good morning. We are going to continue on with our story about Joseph today and talk about his family coming to Egypt. We're going to start in Genesis 45, and I will read some of the verses. I suggest if you want to get the full story, go ahead and read the chapters because there will be little things that I will not highlight. So when they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, the brothers told Jacob, Joseph is still alive. And this is in chapter 45. In fact, he is the ruler of Egypt. Jacob was stunned, and he did not believe his sons. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father was revived. And Israel, whose name had been changed from Jacob to Israel, said, I'm convinced my son Joseph is alive. I will go and see him before I die. And then just a few verses out of Genesis 46. So Israel set out with all that was his. And when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Jacob, or Israel, as his name had been changed to, had been convinced that his son Joseph was indeed dead for many years. To have news that he was now alive, much less the head ruler of a country, consider his confusion. But he was convinced when he saw all of the things sent back to help with the trip back to Egypt. So as he is leaving the land promised to Abraham and his descendants, Jacob took time to give honor to God and praise. And God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, Jacob, Jacob, here I am. Jacob replied. God said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hands will close your eyes. God's reassurance was given to Jacob here in this vision, something Jacob was familiar with as God often appeared to him at night. If you remember back to our travels with Jacob, he had a nightly vision when he was on his way to Laban's house where he got his wife. And he also had another vision when he was on his way back home to meet his father, Abraham, once again. And so this was the way God confirmed his presence and power and leading in his life. Then in verse 5, it says, Then Jacob left Beersheba and Israel's son. And you'll notice in the scriptures, it interchanges his name, Jacob and Israel. Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport them. So Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt, taking with them their livestock and the possessions that they had acquired in Canaan. Jacob brought with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons and his daughters and granddaughters, all of his offspring. All those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those who were his direct descendants, not counting his sons' wives, numbered 66 persons. With the two sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family which went to Egypt were 70 in all. And now that's not the total number of people that were traveling, but that's the total number that would have been counted at that particular point in time. Now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, Now I am ready to die, since I have seen you for myself and know you are alive. Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go and speak to Pharaoh and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who were living in the land of Canaan, have come to me. The men are shepherds. They tend livestock, and they brought their flocks and herds and everything they own. When Pharaoh calls you in and asks, what is your occupation? You should answer, your servants have attended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did. Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians. And then in chapter 47, Joseph went and told Pharaoh, my brothers and my father, with their flocks and herds and everything they own and their families, have arrived from Canaan and are now in Goshen. He chose 5 of his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked the brothers, what is your occupation? Your servants are shepherds, they replied to Pharaoh, just as our fathers were. They also said to him, we have come to live here for a while because the famine in Canaan is very severe, and your servants' flocks have no pasture. So now please let your servants settle in Goshen. Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock. Let me read that verse again. That's verse 6. Starting in verse 5, Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob in and presented him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and Pharaoh asked him, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food according to the number of their children. Interesting scenario here, as Joseph chose a portion of his brothers only to meet with Pharaoh. Did you notice as I was reading, Pharaoh told Joseph to put his best herdsman brothers in charge of Pharaoh's herds. This indicates Pharaoh's complete trust in Joseph, as well as in Joseph's family, people Pharaoh was just meeting. Then Joseph also brought his father in to meet Pharaoh. After they greeted each other, Jacob blessed Pharaoh as he left his presence. Joseph then took his family to the land called Goshen and settled his family there. Today I want to draw our attention to a phenomenon that I have been observing as I have been studying the life of Joseph over the past few weeks. I am not sure if it is something any one of you have noticed, but it would be good for us to ponder it and see how it is something for us to consider in our own lives. I'm going to go all the way back to Joseph being in prison. Did any one of you happen to notice that Joseph was not really in prison itself? It says he was staying in the house of the captain of the guards. That's in Genesis 41, 9 through 13. One wonders how he was not in the regular prison. Is that where he was first placed? In the regular prison, and he earned the opportunity to be moved into the house of the head guard? We are not told, but I believe it is noteworthy as to Joseph's character. Then if we go further in chapter 41, Pharaoh had a dream that not one of his great wise men or sages could interpret or tell him the meaning. This did not make him very happy at all, as the dream had left him very troubled. As the cupbearer had observed the countenance of his king, he remembered his forgotten promise to Joseph. He immediately brought Joseph to the awareness of Pharaoh. "I know someone who may be able to help interpret your dream," he said. "He did so for the butler and I a few years back, what he told us came true." So then Pharaoh called for Joseph. Remember now that God gave Joseph the ability to interpret, and indeed he again gave Joseph the meaning of Pharaoh's dreams. When we studied chapter 41 of Genesis, I'm not sure if you gave it a second thought, how Joseph not only interpreted the dreams, but immediately he was promoted from prison inmate to second in command in the whole country of Egypt. This was right after he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. He now had power over a foreign people in a foreign country where he had been brought as a slave. And not only that, to be in prison and within hours be put in command of a country when the king had never even heard your name before or seen you before. How is this even possible? This is only possible with God. It also shows us the character of Joseph. Even though he had been in some awful situations, and often not because of wrong he had done, he chose to make the best of the situation at the moment. He was faithful to God. It was all about character. So today, I want to challenge us. Our lives as well are all about character. How willing are you and I to being faithful to God, no matter what situation we find ourselves in? And let me assure you that every one of us has challenges, and while some may seem more difficult or troublesome or undeserved, etc., God does not make mistakes. In Psalm 109, we find David in distress, yet he asked for and trusted God to give him guidance and strength. Another person in the Old Testament was Job. And while many of us may not like the story of Job or even understand it fully, it does show the presence of God in one's life, even in dire circumstances. Even today, God is with everyone who trusts him in the big struggles and the little struggles. But one must be open to God. We are going to look at a passage in the New Testament as we bring this challenge to more of a personal level. All of us have had experiences in our lives of one kind or another. A struggle, darkness, hopelessness, pain, anger, loneliness, abandonment. Why me, God? And all of us have embraced our situations differently as individuals. Some of us feeling more in touch with God than others. Let us look at some verses from Ephesians 5. Starting with verse 8. You groped your way through that murk once, but no longer. You are now out in the open. The bright light of Christ will make your way plain. So no more stumbling about. Get on with it. The good, the right, the true. These are the actions appropriate for daylight hours. Figure out what will please God and then do it. Don't waste your time on useless work, mere busy work, the barren pursuits of darkness. Expose these things for the sham that they are. It's a scandal when people waste their lives on things they must do in the darkness when no one will see. Rip the cover off those frauds and see how attractive they look in the light of Christ. Wake up from your sleep. Climb out of the darkness. Christ will show you the light. So watch your step. Use your head. Make the most of every chance you get. These are desperate times. So for Joseph, he trusted God to show him the way. He used his head, and that was rather obvious a few times. Maybe not always when he was young with his family, but definitely as he was older. And every time he was given an opportunity by God to prove himself, he rose to the occasion. It was because of his faithfulness, his character, that God rewarded him. And how could Joseph even have dreamed to what extent he would be rewarded? He not only helped out the country of Egypt for Pharaoh, it led to the preservation of his father's family. And he actually got to see his father before he died. It also led to the preservation of the whole then known world. So for you, so for I, as we trust God to show us the way in these times of great uncertainty, where and what do we still want to be? Many times I see and hear people say, I just want to get back to normal. Our normal has been dashed and broken. You know what? Joseph's normal was dashed and broken. He chose to call upon God and to stay faithful to God. What about you and I? Will you and I be found trustworthy and faithful in our walk with God, so that it will be evident in these days as we work, as we live, and as we walk through our lives? Will you and I be able, as Joseph, to offer hope and life to the world around us? First of all, in our families. Second, in our neighborhood, in our workplace. And some of us do not work, but we also have the opportunity to show Jesus to the world as we walk through the world. As you meet people you may not even know, and they greet you. Do you greet them back? Or do you ignore them? Have you reached out? My friends, our character as Christians is very, very important, especially in the troublesome world that we live in right now. People are struggling. People are looking for hope. You and I, with our faith, as Joseph, we have hope. Are we willing to embrace that hope, live that hope, and allow God to shine in and through us as we live and walk through this broken world, helping people possibly find a new normal that will be a faith in God. Amen. Lord, we thank you, first of all, for the gift of life that you have given to each one of us. Help us to look at Joseph and to be challenged, as well as given hope, that even when it seems like our lives are turned upside down and brought into darkness where we do not like to live, that being faithful to you can bring honor and glory to you. Help us, O God, each one, to be open to you, to let your light shine within us and then through us, bringing hope to others. In Jesus' name, amen.